Story 1. Globophobia, the fear of balloons. My mum had it when I was younger and could not be in the same room as balloons. She eventually worked in a birthday card and gift shop where she had to blow up balloons. Learning to control how much she inflated them helped her a lot. She is still afraid of them popping, but she can be in the same room as balloons now. Story 2. Ketophobia is the fear of hair. The man is bald and has a compulsive hair-pulling disorder called trichotillomania. Story 3. My 19-year-old son had a girlfriend who would come over and really liked our cats. We ended up rescuing 4 newborn kittens, which she was afraid of. She became more frightened as they grew and started running around, climbing, and jumping on things. She was literally scared of them and even said kittens were ugly. How can someone be perfectly fine hanging out with a house full of adult cats but be petrified of kittens? She was a sweet girl, but that was strange. Story 4. I once read about xanthophobia, the fear of the color yellow. Imagine walking down the street in summer and having a panic attack because someone wore a bright t-shirt. Story 5. I once met someone who had an irrational fear of jelly. Not of eating it, but of watching it wiggle. Story 6. Whistling. I used to know a woman who would start screaming and cover her ears if she heard someone whistling. I always suspected it was due to a horrible childhood trauma, but she never told me. Story 7. I knew someone with geophirophobia, a fear of bridges. The problem was that the city they lived in, like many, was split in two by a river. Crossing bridges on foot was out of the question, but driving across was apparently fine. Whenever they needed to get across town, they would take a bus for one stop to cross. That behavior illustrated the irrationality of phobias. Story 8. I have tocophobia, the fear of pregnancy and childbirth. I am a 30-year-old woman and have never been pregnant. The thought of carrying another human inside my body and then giving birth in any way makes me physically queasy. Story 9. I have a fear of feet that used to be a full-blown phobia. I could not look at or touch even my own feet for a long time. Once, as a teenager, my feet were very sore and dry, but because I could not touch them to treat them, I had to smear lotion on the bottom of the bath and stand in it. It has gotten much better over the years, but even when I had my first baby, I felt ill going near his feet. My best friend has a phobia of mashed potatoes. Story 10. Baby corn. I shit you not. I learned about it while sitting at a campsite with friends. One friend opened a can of baby corn. Another friend, sitting across the fire pit, suddenly jumped up, yelped, and darted to the safety of the ring of tents. She collected herself, explained what had happened, and politely asked our friend not to eat it there. Having seen such an immediate visceral reaction, I am fairly convinced it was not made up. Story 11. That would be me. I cannot eat homemade food prepared by other people. I imagine them in disgusting scenarios while preparing the food, such as scratching their crotch, sweating under their arms, or having very dirty fingernails while kneading dough. Once such a scenario pops into my head, I cannot eat. Story 12. People laugh or find it funny when I start crying at the sight of jelly. I understand because it seems a bit odd, but when people keep laughing while I am throwing up and shaking with anxiety, it is not funny. I think it stems from being force-fed in school at age 5. A dinner lady held my mouth open. Even after I screamed, cried, and vomited, she continued until it was all gone. I still cannot look at jelly. My parents were bullies too. They laughed and said I was being dramatic. I do not think I was. 3 other women who worked in the canteen complained to the head teacher, and the dinner lady was made to apologize. Also, the way jelly moves feels extremely untrustworthy. Story 13. I have a fear of used stickers. I am fine with them when they are brand new on a sticker sheet, but once they have been stuck to something and then peeled off, they make me panic. Story 14. My wife is terrified of modern wind turbines, not vintage ones. I thought she meant it casually, not like a real phobia, but the first time we were driving and she saw a field of them, she had to pull over because she was crying. I have no clue where this phobia comes from. Story 15. I have emetophobia, a fear of vomit. I cannot vomit without having a panic attack. The same applies to seeing or cleaning up vomit. Fortunately, my family is very understanding. So when my dogs or my child have vomited, my mother and husband have stepped in to clean up and deal with it. When I was a preschool and toddler teacher, my colleagues and I agreed that I would handle other bodily fluids and they would manage any vomit that occurred. Pregnancy was rough because I was nauseous around the clock for 7 of the 9 months. I only threw up 1 or 2 times. I am grateful for antiemetic medications. Story 16. I'm scared of ketchup, mayonnaise, and baked beans. I used to be unable to be in the same room when my flatmate was making baked beans. I could not put ketchup on anything, even for someone else. I now have 2 small children who eat mostly mayonnaise and love beans, so I have to be near their food. It makes me dry heave, and I cannot even look at it when I put it on their plates without feeling ill. If it touches me, I will absolutely freak out. I remember working in a cinema at 17. A colleague did not believe me when I said I could not do the nacho sauce. They were annoyed that I always had to ask someone else to handle it. One day a colleague thought it would be funny to chase me with the tub. After a severe panic attack, they did not think it was funny anymore. Story 17. My brother is scared of metal. Most of our house is metal-free. Story 18. I know someone that's terrified of sourdough starter. It's me. Story 19. This one still gets me. I once met someone who had a legitimate phobia of belly buttons. Not just touching their own. They could not even look at someone else's without freaking out. Story 20. Apples and bananas, literally those 2 fruits. She was once on a bus when someone boarded carrying, not eating, a banana, and she had to get off at that stop. Story 21. I have an unusual phobia, molluscophobia, the fear of slugs. It is irrational, but I cannot bring myself to walk on a sidewalk if there is a slug or its slime on it. I will go well off the path to avoid it. Story 22. I have a strange fear of falling into the sky. When I stare at the sky, I feel and believe that I am falling upward. This effect is stronger in daylight with a clear sky, though I have heard others experience it differently or in reverse. Story 23. I am afraid of mold, but not of germs. It just looks weird. Story 24. A nail fungus commercial featured an animation of a creature raising a toenail and climbing underneath. Viewers could not watch it without imagining their toenails being ripped off by the creature. Story 25. My mother was terrified of escalators and refused to use them. This mattered during the era of shopping malls, but it is a moot point now. I do not remember the last time I was in a mall, let alone on an escalator. She was also afraid of birds and cats, but she eventually got over both. She had a superstition about an unspecified cat disease, and I think her fear of birds may have come from the Hitchcock movie. Otherwise, I would have thought it would have been one or the other. Story 26. I have mysophobia, also known as germophobia. I hate anything that could be dirty or unclean. I wash my hands repeatedly, shower every morning, and try to avoid being touched by, or touching, anything I consider dirty. That includes not touching my nose or mouth, avoiding objects that someone else has touched or licked, and not letting my dog lick me. I even get uncomfortable playing a computer game or watching a television show where someone does those things, such as not washing their hands after using the bathroom. It is exhausting. Story 27. A friend of mine can't be around moths. Butterflies are fine, but moths trigger a meltdown. Story 28. Orthopterophobia is a phobia of crickets. I know they cannot hurt me, but I have a full-blown panic attack if I hear a cricket inside my home, hear one nearby when I am outdoors, or see one. I have learned to tolerate the sound of multiple crickets in the distance, but anything more direct is a hard no. Story 29. I have a fear of plumbing. I haven't yet found the right words to describe it, but any plumbing error gives me the heebie-jeebies. An overflowing toilet can cause a panic attack, and any place with many pipes makes me anxious. Imagine the background infrastructure of water parks. Story 30. I have globophobia, the fear of balloons. This is very unfortunate. Story 31. My former partner's younger cousin had a phobia of amputees. I am not sure if it is officially recognized, but if she saw an amputee in public, she would have a panic attack. Story 32. Nomophobia is the fear of being without a mobile phone or of losing signal. I find it strange. Story 33. A girl in my math class was afraid of stickers. Someone put one on her sweater, and she had me sit between her and it even after I removed the sticker, so she would not have to see the contaminated garment. Story 34. I fear whales and anything larger than me in the water. My worst nightmare is being in the middle of the ocean next to a whale or a cruise ship. The idea of something like the Titanic is terrifying. If I am crossing a large bridge, I am okay as long as I do not look at the pylons holding it up in the water. The closer I am, the worse it gets. I have a hard time even being in the water next to a canoe, which is frustrating because I like wakeboarding but panic when it is time to climb back into the boat. Story 35. I am afraid of jam donuts and empty chairs. There is a donut place near my house, and if anyone says they are stopping there on the way over, I tell them that if they get a jam donut, they must eat it before arriving, because I cannot have jam donuts in the house. Story 36. I have a fear of worms, scoliophobia. Snakes? No problem, I would even wrap them around my neck. Spiders? I love them. Dead bodies? Just another workday. But show me a worm and I will shake, scream, and run away faster than Usain Bolt. Story 37. I am afraid of stairs with gaps. Normal stairs are totally fine, but stairs missing the riser feel terrifying. I always imagine slipping and falling through the gaps. It did not help that, as a child, my first exposure to this kind of stair was directly above a large aquarium. Now I mostly worry about dropping my phone, so I hold it tightly. Story 38. Mine is a bit unusual. I have cytoglobophobia, the fear of cotton balls, swabs, and the stuff they put in pill bottles. It's the feel of them, the sound, everything about them makes my teeth itch. Also, I can't use brown paper towels in public restrooms for the same reasons. Story 39. I have an undiagnosed condition I have had as long as I can remember. Alexithymia. I have a strange fear of saying other people's names. Even with friends I've known for years, I'm afraid the name I think they use isn't actually their name, and they'll be offended if I get it wrong. The only people whose names I feel comfortable saying are immediate family members I've known my whole life. My ex-wife noticed that I never called her by her name after more than a decade. It reached the point where saying her name sounded strange to me, so I avoided it. Story 40. A student in 10th grade chorus class would have a meltdown when he heard jingling, whether from bells, keys, or similar sounds. I don't know if this is an official phobia, but I know someone who is petrified of people of short stature. They worked at a pharmacy and would have to walk away and get someone else to ring them up. They are aware it is irrational and say it is not a personal issue but that the proportions do not look right to them. Story 41. I have agrostophobia, a fear of grass. It was a major problem as a child, but now that I am in my 30s, I can force myself to walk on well-trampled grass with my shoes on. I still cannot walk through tall grass or handle grass clippings. I have no issue with other plants. My fear applies only to grass. Story 42. My biggest phobia is belly buttons. Seeing people touch them or having my own touched makes me feel nauseous and like I am going to pass out. Story 43. They were uncomfortable with amputees and disliked How to Train Your Dragon because hiccup losing a leg upset them. Story 44. I have molluscophobia, the fear of snails and slugs. I experience extreme anxiety and cry when I see one. Once, as a child, my uncle sat me down and forced me to look at pictures of snails and slugs. I had a full breakdown. A man in my friend group would repeatedly send slug stickers to trigger me. It was not fun. Story 45. Earthworms. I once worked with a woman who, when it rained, held her hands beneath her eyes like a shield, so she couldn't see them coming out of the ground. If you said the word worm within earshot of her, she would scream. Story 46. Dolphins are not to be trusted and should be feared and avoided. Story 47. Cytoglobophobia, also called bambicophobia, is the fear of cotton balls. Story 48. I knew a girl who was terrified of sponges. We used sponges in art class to clean paint, and some kids kept coming to bother her. She would scream and run every time. Story 49. My friend's family has some kind of germophobia, at least when it comes to dishes. You must wash your hands thoroughly when you put the dishes away. Every time I empty the dishwasher or help, They tell me to wash my hands. I just say okay. Story 50. My friend fears balloons. Not the pop, but the silence before. Story 51. I don't know anyone with it, but I hear a fear of gravity is a real thing. How? What are you going to do about it? Story 52. Lettuce. I thought she was messing with me until we went out to eat and someone sat next to us with visible lettuce on their burger. I had a full-blown panic attack. Story 53. I have a severe phobia of human toes, not of feet. My partner has always been very supportive and careful when we cuddle. Story 54. On the Maury show, a woman who is afraid of pickles appeared. Story 55. Oh, I am afraid of caterpillars. I cannot even look at them. I close my eyes if they are on TV. I watched a child eat one on the playground in kindergarten, and then I began having nightmares where I was covered in them. Story 56. I have a fear of the eyes on potatoes. I will not handle a potato that is sprouting. I will leave the room and make my kids or husband deal with it. Story 57. I once convinced someone who was afraid of elevators to get in. They had a heart attack, which made me fear being in an elevator with someone in cardiac distress. Story 58. Not nearly as bad as when I was a kid, but I still fear high ceilings and tall buildings. I had an irrational fear of floating up into the sky when I was at a high point and then falling. I toured an airport hangar and became very dizzy. I also feared that something might fall on me. As an adult, I get nauseous if I look straight up at a tall building from the ground. Being inside the open garden center at Home Depot also made me feel slightly queasy. Story 59. My cousin hated chewing gum. She would cry and panic when her brother teased her by putting his chewing gum in her face. She said it reminded her of a brain. I don't know if that has a name. Story 60. Fear of bubbles or of many circular shapes clumped together. Story 61. I experienced it when I went into a tanning bed. Panicked. Story 62. I have a phobia of moths. It is one of several phobias I have, but this one is the oddest. Story 63. I knew someone at school who was genuinely terrified of flowers. They had that nails against the chalkboard type of physical revulsion toward them, too. Story 64. I once worked with a girl who was deathly afraid of peas. Story 65. I saw a television show about strange phobias. A man had a phobia of grapes. Story 66. I knew someone when I was younger who was afraid of bagpipes. I do not know how she felt about seeing them, but hearing them was worse. We ended up at a surprise performance in the park. I do not remember the play, and the girl flipped out. Looking back, there is a chance it was a sensory issue because bagpipes are very loud. Story 67. When I was in middle school, there was a girl who claimed to be terrified of bananas. I was a nice kid, but I thought it would be funny to chase her with a banana peel with a friend because I did not think she was serious. She did not talk to me for the rest of the day. I do not know if she is still afraid of them. It is not really a phobia, but when I eat chicken, I do not want to feel a bone near my mouth. If a small piece of bone ends up in my mouth, I lose my appetite. Story 68. One of my therapists in rehabilitation said he had a patient with ornithophobia or bird phobia. It sounded awful. She was unable to go outside. Story 69. My sister-in-law is deathly afraid of butterflies. She runs away screaming, shaking, and breaking into a cold sweat if one comes near her. Story 70. I knew a guy growing up who had a phobia of French fries. Story 71. I had a colleague with a phobia of water. It was very unpleasant for him and for the rest of us because he never showered. Story 72. Maybe not the weirdest, but it was intense. At summer camp in high school, there was a girl who was terrified of chickens. We all rode bicycles to a place where chickens were in a yard. As she rode past, she screamed as if her arm had been cut off. I had never seen anyone so terrified because of a nearby chicken. Story 73. I'm not sure what it's called, but I am absolutely terrified of mice. I act tough until I see a rodent, and then I have a nuclear meltdown. You may see a field mouse. I see Godzilla. Story 74. Achondroplasia phobia. Fear of people with dwarfism. This is one of the most unusual phobias I have observed. Story 75. I know some people might not find it unusual, but I live with it and it is extremely distressing. I have emetophobia. I am terrified of vomiting or of being near someone who is vomiting. It is so severe that when I start to feel unwell, or if someone mentions they feel unwell, I am thrown into intense panic attacks. Story 76. I am terrified of things that swing. Seeing light fixtures sway or amusement rides in motion freaks me out. I haven't always been like this, and I don't know why it started. I believe it's called pendulophobia. Story 77. Balloons were not allowed in the office because they caused a woman to scream and bolt for the door. Story 78. I used to go to school with a girl who had a phobia of cotton, specifically cotton swabs. Story 79. Fear of styrofoam. It makes sense when you learn how it typically develops. It often begins with the squeaky sound, which can be like nails on a chalkboard and cause a strong discomfort response such as wincing or cringing. The sound bothers some people more than others. Inevitably, someone notices and thinks it is funny, and intentionally squeaks the styrofoam to provoke that reaction. The prankster may think it is no big deal, while the target experiences real distress. This gap in understanding creates expectation and anxiety. People who fear styrofoam may worry that anyone handling it could at any moment use it to cause discomfort. They believe others will not stop until they have caused significant distress. The person with the phobia holds onto this anxious expectation and remains tense until the styrofoam is put away. Only then can they relax. Until then, they expect some kind of forced confrontation. The fear makes the person more tense and anxious around styrofoam. In more severe cases, the anxiety can extend to the styrofoam itself. Most people with this fear do not feel anxious as long as nobody is handling or near the styrofoam, for example, when it is boxed in a corner. But if anxiety is high enough, even that box can be a problem. Story 80. Yesterday, I asked my 8-year-old to take the pumpkin guts to the food recycling bin after we finished baking. He accidentally dropped them on the ground. He came out gagging and crying, saying he couldn't do it. It wasn't the smell. It was what it looked like. Story 81. I have misophonia to the sound brrr made with lips. It triggers a visceral reaction that makes me want to slap the mouth of whoever is making it. I hate it, and it ruins my mood completely. Story 82. I once saw a woman in the audience on the Graham Norton show who was afraid of bread sweat. She called it that, but it was simply the condensation from fresh toast. Anyway, it's a strange fear. Story 83. Fear of the moon is called selenophobia. I do not think I would call any art weird. Most pieces are simply unusual to someone who does not share the same perspective. I think it is fascinating. Story 84. The love of my life has a son who is so afraid of vomiting that he eats small bites and avoids solid food. He is still a child, but it is a legitimate phobia. Story 85. When I was a child, I was afraid of wigs. I thought they were real scalps from other people. Story 86. She couldn't even watch Spirited Away because the pig skin looked too much like human skin. Story 87. I know someone who had a strange fear of soap bubbles. He became terrified whenever he saw them at birthday parties. We never knew why. That was strange. Story 88. I am not sure if this is considered weird, but it may be a little extreme. I have acrophobia, the fear of heights, so intense that I feel scared and nervous even on the second floor of a building. As a child, I refused to look out of my bedroom window because it was high above the ground. Bridges and steep hills are impossible for me. I almost hyperventilate when crossing bridges in a vehicle. Story 89. Ibophobia is the fear of palindromes. The word itself is a palindrome, probably to scare sufferers even more. Story 90. I am afraid of chickens. Maybe the weirdest phobia I have ever heard of. Story 91. I worked in long-term care where a Mennonite congregation regularly came to sing to the residents. A newer woman started working with me once. She did not know this group came weekly. She turned the corner into the dining room and went pale. The entire congregation was standing there, waiting for the residents to get situated. They looked at her as if to say, what on earth? She was seconds away from passing out. Story 92. My ex was afraid of being tickled, and I respected that boundary. His fear was of not being able to breathe when tickled. His parents were irresponsible teenagers when they had him, and his father thought it was funny to tickle him until he could not breathe. They are mostly no contact now for many reasons. Story 93. A friend of mine has a phobia of whales. We live about 500 kilometers from the nearest ocean, so thankfully it does not come up much. How does one develop a phobia of something so far away? Story 94. Balloons. My old boss was terrified of them. He was also an ass, so I filled his office, his drawers, and anything else I could with balloons. I even left a few on his parking space. Story 95. I don't remember the name of it, but I knew a young woman who worked in a deli making sandwiches, and she had a fear of mustard. Story 96. I am deathly afraid of dolls. I do not know why. They creep me out, and I get a shiver up my spine and feel very anxious around them. Story 97. I haven't seen this personally, but I know there's a phobia of flowers. Story 98. I have a friend who is afraid of blue eyes. I am afraid of mannequins, wax figures, and animatronics. Automatonophobia. I know several people who are afraid of stop-motion animation. Story 99. I am afraid of butterflies, insects, and reptiles. Most people find it strange and do not believe me. Story 100. She has an extreme fear of snails and must be carried when there are snails outside, where she will cry in panic. Story 101. I had a friend who was terrified of the extraterrestrial. We worked together for 15 years at a haunted house, and she was one of the most ruthlessly scary actors I ever worked with. The way she could make grown men cry was masterful, but that extraterrestrial character was her kryptonite. Story 102. I actually have ostraconophobia, the fear of shrimp. I honestly do not know how I developed it, but touching shrimp gives me the same feeling a person with arachnophobia would have if spiders were on them. Funnily enough, I love spiders. Story 103. I worked with someone who said she was terrified of cotton balls. Story 104. Coulrophobia, fear of clowns. I do not want to see one. There is nothing cute about them. I do not understand why people bring strange men to children's parties dressed as creepy figures. I have cried and screamed and tried to punch someone to get away. Clowns are not for me. I love Batman and the Joker is fine. I do not know why. Brumotactilophobia, fear of food touching. If foods touch, I will not eat them. I have stared at my plate for a long time trying to make sense of the order. I would use my utensil to arrange everything in the perfect spot to start. Then after every single bite I would move things so they did not touch. Eating is exhausting. I now use a food separator plate. It makes things much easier. For foods that can be combined, I still eat components one at a time. For example, in a salad I eat all the carrots first. I am always last to make my plate and last to finish eating. Fear of raw chicken. No established scientific name. I cannot tolerate raw chicken. I do not want to see it, smell it, hear it, or touch it. Nothing. The juices and any moisture freak me out. I have had full panic attacks from just seeing it, and certainly when it has gotten on me. People think they clean up well after handling it, but often they have not. A black light would reveal how much spatter was missed and how contaminated it can be. I am also bothered by people who use wooden cutting boards. I will eat it only if it is nearly dry. Any moisture is intolerable. Pediophobia, fear of dolls. I find dolls creepy, regardless of type. Porcelain dolls especially trigger me. They started my phobia. There is a long story thanks to my grandmother. I cannot stand lifelike dolls people carry around these days. They make the hairs on my arms stand up and cause me to move away. Dolls are not acceptable to me. I lose control. If I am already having a hard day, I will have a meltdown. Story 105. I have a fear of jewelry, especially pieces with diamonds or other sparkling materials. Seeing people wear sparkling jewelry makes me scared. I am grateful that my mom and my sister know about it and have been trying to comfort me. Story 106. My 14-year-old son, who will soon be 15, has had a phobia of his birthdays since he was 3. He has high-functioning autism, which may be a contributing factor. Story 107. I have menophobia, the fear of menstruation, which is odd because I do not have hemophobia, the fear of blood. Do not get me wrong. No woman enjoys her period. I laugh, but for me it has been incredibly traumatic since age 11. I sob and shake every month when it arrives. My period has always terrified me, and I cannot explain why. Story 108. She has compoundophobia, the fear of buttons. Fortunately, it is limited to clothing buttons and does not include buttons on devices. She is disgusted by them and can barely touch them even at the best of times. The bigger and more pronounced the buttons are, the worse it is. Story 109. When I was in primary school many decades ago, I remember we used to chase one lad around the playground with plasticine, the colorful modeling clay. He was terrified and we were really evil to him. Story 110. I have a phobia about buttons. I used to think it was just me, but it's definitely a thing. Story 111. I worked with someone who was afraid of bananas. We got fresh fruit delivered 3 times a week at the office, and if there were a lot of bananas, she would ask people to give her a heads up so she did not go in and get a fright. She asked people not to eat them while talking to her or to keep them on their desk in a way that encroached on her desk area. Our desks were long benches without dividers, so if the person next to you had clutter, their stuff could spill onto your area. She was fine with banana-flavored food, or the sight of bananas peeled and chopped in a salad, or the smell of someone eating one out of sight, but a whole unpeeled banana just gave her the chills. Story 112. I have a horrible phobia of grapes. I think they are disgusting. The way they squish and roll makes me think they are unclean. I have been exposed a lot since grapes are everywhere, so I can be in the same room with them, but I still try to avoid looking at them. I used to lose my appetite completely. It still extends to most small, round things. I hate pearls, beads, earrings, anything small and rolling. I don't eat about half of fruits, such as blueberries, raspberries, or any fruit cups where pieces touch. It's gotten more manageable, but I think I'll always eat the majority of my fruit blended. Story 113. One of my teaching assistants in high school was deathly afraid of staplers. I thought he was joking. He was older than me, and I thought he was a big, bad senior, so I opened the stapler like it was a gun and started firing at him. But I stopped the moment I saw real fear in his eyes and profusely apologized. Story 114. Maybe not a phobia, but an extreme aversion to the dried plug found on the opening of pump bottles of paint, lotion, shampoo, and similar products. It makes me gag to touch it to remove it. The aversion stems from getting that plug from a pump bottle of vanilla flavoring in a Sonic milkshake that should have been smooth plain vanilla. It was the closest I have ever come to vomiting in the car. Story 115. Beets, man. They make my skin crawl. Story 116. Trypophobia is a strong aversion or disgust toward clusters of small holes or repeating patterns, such as those exhibited by sponges. One of my daughter's friends has it. It was very strange to see in person. Story 117. I don't know if there is a name for it, but I am terrified of jellyfish. It used to be anything that lived in water, but I can tolerate regular fish and so on now. At one point, I couldn't even watch SpongeBob, as ridiculous as that sounds. Story 118. Catoptrophobia is the fear of mirrors. I have had it since I was a teenager. It is not about ghosts or anything like that. I just panic when I see my reflection. My chest tightens, and it feels as if I am staring at a stranger. Now I avoid large mirrors, use my phone camera when necessary, and rely on how I feel instead of obsessing over my appearance. It has not gone away, but I have learned to live with it. Story 119. My daughter is almost 9 years old and has a fear of having her nails cut. She becomes very upset at the sight of nail clippers and cries a lot if I bring them out. I usually cut her nails while she is asleep. Story 120. An old coworker made fun of me because I said I was afraid of insects. I asked her what she was afraid of, and she said whales. I immediately told everyone about the absurdity of her fear. We don't live near an ocean. We're pretty much in the middle of the continent. Where would she find a whale? Story 121. I worked with someone who was afraid of those cardboard drink holders you get at fast food places. She refused to touch them and hated having her drink placed in one. Story 122. I am afraid of anyone doing anything to my eyes. Optometrist appointments are horrible, and because I wear glasses, I have to go. Story 123. My niece can't even look at a picture of a turtle without being repulsed. She says they are aggressive and will hurt you. Snapping turtles do bite, but only if you touch or pick them up. Story 124. On another message board, there was a member who was afraid of maps. Story 125. My friend is deeply disgusted by cotton wool and hates touching it even if it is clean and dry. She works as a nurse, which does not make things better. Story 126. Whales. My friend would end up in a cold sweat if he saw even pictures of them. Story 127. In high school, one of the popular girls had a phobia of cans, such as soda cans or canned goods. I don't know why, and she didn't know either. They just freaked her out. Story 128. Claustrophobia is the fear of being trapped. People do not really understand it because it can occur even in large open spaces or when walking between certain objects, such as closely parked cars. People often assume it is claustrophobia, but it is a different condition. I have met only one other person so far who also has it. Story 129. My mom is terrified of buttons. I had to learn to sew when I was very young so I could reattach them to my school uniform. Story 130. A girl I went to school with was deathly afraid of velvet. I do not know if that has a name, but here we are. Story 131. Sunflowers. Big machinery. Barcodes. All of those are mine. Story 132. Someone close to me is repelled by soft, creamy white or beige foods. I am not sure whether this is a phobia. Story 133. I remember a talk show host who was afraid of pennies, though I cannot recall who. I would never laugh at someone's phobia, but some are unusual. Who knows how the mind works? Story 134. A good friend is terrified of people in bunny mascot costumes. Other mascots are fine. The fear is specific to bunnies. Story 135. Bananas. Never in a million years I imagined it was possible. Story 136. I have many unusual phobias. Trypophobia, thalassophobia, and vexophobia. I honestly thought trypophobia was a psychological malfunction and never spoke about it until I saw a short social media video and learned I was not the only person who experienced it. The fear of flags is the strangest. Story 137. I had a friend in college who was afraid of all animals. Birds, squirrels, cats, dogs, and so on. It did not matter how large or how small. Ironically, they were obsessed with Pokemon, so I guess they only liked mythical animals. Story 138. Hearing a utensil scraping someone's teeth? My half-brother reacted strongly to that sound. And no, he was not diagnosed with anything. Does that really happen? I never understood it. Story 139. I don't know if it's weird, but I haven't met anyone else who has it. I'm pretty sure I have herpetophobia, the fear of reptiles. Lizards, frogs, and toads are the worst offenders for me. Snakes also used to be pretty bad, but that has gotten a lot better with time. I could probably pet one now. When I was little, I couldn't even look at pictures of frogs and toads. I had to cover pictures of them in science books with my hands. I still have difficulty with that sometimes. Videos are not an option. Once I was at a summer program at a college in Georgia, and there were frogs around the building where we were staying. I never saw any, but just hearing them croak at night made me so visibly uncomfortable that a girl I was hanging out with asked me if I was okay as we went up the stairs. I've also gotten better with lizards. I used to not be able to be near them even with glass between us or look at pictures. Now I can see pictures and watch videos of them and even think some are cute. But if one is near me in real life, I will hurriedly give it a wide berth. Once I saw one on a pillar outside my front door as I was leaving. I turned around and left out the side door. I have no idea why. They just make me so uncomfortable and activate my flight response. That said, I hope none of these animals are harmed. I just want them to be at least 10 feet away from me. Story 140. My mom has a phobia of mayonnaise, and I worked with someone who had a phobia of baked beans. Those are pretty unusual phobias to have. Story 141. In the 90s, I was watching The Real World and there was a girl who was afraid of tall things. Not heights. She was only afraid of things taller than she was. They were boarding a boat and walking along a dock, and she had to cover her head so she would not see the masts of the sailboats. She had a panic attack. Story 142. Bare trees without leaves. Human faces that are upside down. Frogs and their depictions. 3 different people. Story 143. I knew a woman who had an extremely severe case of obsessive-compulsive disorder. She feared she would be compelled to swallow the straight pins that her mother, with whom she lived, used for sewing. Story 144. Not so much anymore. When I was a kid, I used to get panic attacks at the thought of eating meat, especially steaks and hunks of meat. Once I was asked to cut up some meat for serving and I had a full-blown panic attack. I'm all right with eating meat now. I'd rather not, but I won't panic. Cutting meat, though, still gives me the heebie-jeebies. Story 145. Fear of cul-de-sacs. I do not understand him and do not think I ever will. Story 146. I am a waiter. I once served a young woman who was afraid of ice in her drinks. She would become very upset. Story 147. Anatophobia. The fear that a duck is always watching you. Story 148. I have a friend who is afraid of moths. Butterflies are fine, but moths are not. Story 149. I think to myself, I have been afraid of buttons since before I could talk. My mom told me that I would scream for hours when she dressed me as a baby and could never figure out why. Thrifting is a nightmare because if I accidentally touch a button, it is game over. Thank God I live in the era of stretchy clothes and zippers. Story 150. My best friend was terrified of butterflies and moths. Story 151. Someone I knew was irrationally afraid of sunflowers, and her reactions to them really irritated me. Story 152. Since I was young, I have had compoundophobia, the fear of circular clusters. I can't even type the word without imagining them touching my skin. My doctor thinks it is more related to sensory overload, but I cannot have them anywhere near me. The sight of them is overwhelming. I also have no clue what triggered it in the first place. Story 153. Probably mine. Is sunflowers. A sunflower actually traumatized me when I was younger. I cried. Story 154. I have submechanophobia, the fear of man-made objects submerged in water. Even thinking about it makes me want to throw up. Story 155. I know someone who is very afraid of dragonflies. I think he may have seen a horror movie when he was a child, and it stuck with him. Story 156. A fear of composite sketches like the ones that artists draw of criminals from people who have seen their faces. Story 157. I have an irrational fear of being randomly teleported. Causes me severe anxiety sometimes. Story 158. A woman I once worked with said she had a phobia of fennel, the spice. Story 159. I have had a phobia of mayonnaise since early childhood. I am not sure if there is a name for it. Story 160. My friend Tina has a phobia of mustard, the condiment. I was very surprised when I brought mustard to a barbecue and she freaked out. I had to put the mustard in my car. She couldn't even look at it without panicking. Story 161. That would be me. Since childhood, I have had a strong fear of balloons and earthworms. With balloons, I am fairly sure that in early childhood a balloon popped near me, and I become very nervous when they are nearby. I fear they will suddenly pop and, out of shock, I bite my tongue. I have improved with age, but as a child birthday parties were not always fun for me. As for earthworms, many people dislike them, but I scream when I see one. Touching is impossible. I shake with disgust. Story 162. A boy I used to play with was terrified of cheese. If he annoyed me, I would go to the fridge, get some cheese, and he would run home. It is called turophobia. Story 163. I have heard of chirophobia, which is the fear of hands. Can be caused by past abuse, but not always. People with chirophobia can be afraid of their own hands, not only the hands of others. Story 164. A kindergarten student of mine who is autistic was terrified of feathers. Another student was terrified of growing up. Story 165. I understand not wanting to ride horses, but I met someone with a genuine fear of them. Story 166. I was warned not to touch cash register receipts because of some substance on them. I forget what it was. Story 167. I have a phobia of mouths. Literally anything to do with them, especially teeth. It affects me whether I'm looking at my own mouth or someone else's. If someone is biting something inedible or their nails, if there are any mouth sounds, going to the dentist, or talking about dental procedures, especially do-it-yourself dental procedures. This stems from traumatic experiences with dentists as a teen and from germophobia. It got much worse when I had 4 teeth removed without pain relief, sedatives, or anesthesia. I had nitrous oxide, commonly called gas and air, which has never worked for me, and injections, but the dentist did not wait for them to take effect. These days I insist on heavy sedatives for any procedure, which helps a lot, though last time I remember waking up twice and trying to punch the dentist. I've mentioned my parents' phobias in other comments. Dad has a phobia of hair, and Mum has a phobia of wind turbines. Both are serious and have been present for many years. Story 168. It's me. I literally cannot eat food someone brought if I do not know what their home looks like. Once I have seen someone's home, I can eat their food even if it is not sparkly clean. For example, I have a colleague whose home I have seen. She has 3 kids and a dog, and it is messy, but when she brings cupcakes I eat them. Another colleague is a neat freak and has no children. She brings a cake, but because I have never seen her home I cannot eat it. My stomach refuses and I get anxious. I do not have this problem with restaurants. Story 169. I used to have a severe phobia of smoke alarms. I would not enter people's houses unless they took the alarms down or covered them. Even then, I stayed on edge and kept my distance. I was absolutely petrified and spent many nights sleeping with my hands over my ears, terrified. They would go off or start that low battery chirp. There was no consoling me when those alarms sounded. I would run away sobbing. I also had an aversion to anything with propellers. Wind turbines, stand-up fans, rudders on boat motors, and airplane propellers. I was a strange kid. Story 170. I have a severe phobia of having my blood pressure taken. It triggers my fight-or-flight response so strongly that I once ran out of a doctor's office. I have tried exposure for years, but now I have decided to accept it. It is extremely embarrassing and inconvenient. Story 171. I have a fear of kites. When I was little, if I flew a kite, I would have a panic attack, especially when the wind was strong because I thought it would carry me away. Even now, whether I am the one flying it or not, I still worry that the kite or I will be carried away. I also have a phobia of blowing that stems from trauma. The thought of blowing can trigger a panic attack. For anyone wondering, yes, even blowing on a Wii. Story 172. When I was younger, I had a fear of dead frogs, invertebrates, and popped balloons. I am fine with balloons now, but I still avoid dead invertebrates. Story 173. I am terrified of ladybugs. As a child, I looked at one with a magnifying glass and was shaken by what I saw. Now, as an adult, I still freak out if one gets close to me. Story 174. I am afraid of buttons and too embarrassed to tell people because I think it is strange. Story 175. I have trypophobia, specifically centered on mushrooms and starfish. I find other items with holes rather fascinating. Story 176. I am afraid of people brushing their teeth. I can't brush my teeth in front of a mirror. I couldn't teach my son to brush his teeth. The dentist is a fucking nightmare. Once I had to go back 4 times for a root canal because my blood pressure was so high they couldn't finish. Toothpaste commercials make me shake and vomit. Story 177. I am terrified of tins with ring pull tabs. It probably stems from cutting my thumb on a can of sardines in hot sauce when I was younger. Luckily, I have a special tool for opening them, but I still get squeamish. Story 178. Cataliophobia, the fear of spoons, and the fear of visual art. Story 179. I know someone who has a fear of buttons, such as the buttons on clothing. She has no idea where it came from, but she certainly hates them. Story 180. My cousin's fear of flying unless it's to go to Vegas with her friends. Story 181. I thought being afraid of rodents was weird, but it is not. However, I am afraid of bologna, ham, and mayonnaise. The smell and the sight of them make my skin crawl and my stomach turn. Story 182. I have cetophobia. A fear of whales. I live in a landlocked state and am over a 14-hour drive from the nearest coast. Story 183. My middle school friend had a phobia of eggs in their shells. She was terrified of touching them. I remember chasing her through her house with an egg. Story 184. It is not a fear or a phobia, but I absolutely cannot tolerate buttons. They gross me out, especially the large ones on knitted clothing. It has always been that way, and I own no clothes with buttons except for the metal ones on jeans, which do not bother me. Otherwise, I avoid them completely. There are too many garments with decorative buttons. It is disgusting to me. I know this is strange. Story 185 about guns in general. I bought a gun and brought it home. It was in a box, still in its packaging, and a friend of my girlfriend was there and started to have a meltdown because she was in the same room as the gun. I thought that was very strange. Story 186. A friend of mine has a phobia of mustard. I thought he was joking, but he has a panic attack if he even sees mustard in the room. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.